All right, so welcome, and I'm sorry I had some technical difficulties about putting up that Zoom video. Today's our going to be our last day for the last information on the next exam. Okay, so it's going to be about endocrine system and also the eye and the ear. Okay, so those are the three topics that we're going to be doing. Okay, so let me actually start off with the endocrine. So I'm going to open up the endocrine slide and we'll talk about endocrine system, okay? All right, so I'm going to share it again, make sure that's the one that you have on your screen. Okay, so your endocrine system, okay, it's hormones that is coming out from endocrine glands, okay? And it's always after the nervous system, the endocrine system, because there's a reason why. So you should be able to see the word right there. So the endocrine system is always after the nervous system because it's quite similar to what the nervous system does, okay? So a series of ductless glands, okay, that secrete messenger molecules that is called hormones. But compared to the nervous system, it exerts a point-to-point control through nerves. But the endocrine system utilizes hormones that they secrete on the circulation. So it's quite similar to what we have for the nervous, okay? So this is going to be an endocrine gland. It secretes hormones to the blood and stimulate target cells. But for the nervous system, a neuron is the one that will actually stimulate the target cell, and it utilizes what we call a neurotransmitter, okay? Quite similar to the hormone function, except that the neurotransmitter is actually the one released at the edge of the synapse. So let's take a look at the characteristics of the hormones compared to the nervous. Hormones regulate slow processes such as growth and metabolism compared to the nerve impulses. They need immediate stimulation. So our endocrine glands is going to be divided into the glands that are pure, okay? So it means the only thing they do is actually secrete hormones. And examples is going to be your pituitary gland, the pineal gland. The next one is going to be the thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland, and then the adrenal gland, okay? So those are your pure endocrine organs. Now, the other one is actually non-pure or partly endocrine organs. That is going to be the pancreas. Pancreas secretes hormones, okay, but it also secretes digestive enzymes, non-hormonal. And then another one is called the thymus, is going to be the secretion of thymosin and hormone, but it's also for the maturation of the lymphocytes. And next is going to be the gonads, okay, and the gonads is for reproduction, but it also produces hormonal changes in the body, such as hair growth, and for the testosterone, beard distribution, hair growth, and also for the females, it's going to be the menstruation cycle. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at your classes of hormones. There's two kinds: amino acid base, okay, and the other one is going to be your steroid base, which is lipid molecules. Examples are going to be sex hormones, and they're located at adrenal cortex hormones. So amino acid is most hormones that we see in the body. They're made out of proteins or what we call modified amino acid peptides. Okay, the two has differentiating on how to actually stimulate the cell receptor. Steroids stimulate a receptor located inside the cell because they're actually lipid soluble, so they can go inside the cell through the cell membrane. Amino acid, they're proteins, so they won't be able to go inside the cell, so they have to stimulate something outside the cell. The receptor is located at the cell membrane. So now we know about the classes, okay? Now, so let's actually take a look at how the hormone is controlled. So you can have three kinds. You got humoral, neural, and hormonal. So the method of control, like for example, how the body knows that this should be a normal value, okay? And some of them are hyper secretion, or some of them are hyposecretion. So the hormones should be able to actually identify how to control their secretion. So the first type of control is called humoral. Okay, so when you say humoral, it's actually controlled by a chemical. Okay, an example of this is going to be the calcium level in the blood. So the calcium level is the one that will actually control the hormone level. Well, hormones such as your parathyroid gland, it will secrete parathormone, okay? And the secretion of the parathormone is to increase calcium level in the blood, because if there's a low calcium level in the blood, the parathyroid gland will note that low calcium level in the blood, so it's going to secrete parathormone, and it's going to target the nephron and the intestinal cells. And what do they do? On the nephron, okay, the action is going to be the kidney will conserve calcium and activate vitamin D. Okay, so the calcium is actually going to be conserved, so it's going to be reabsorbed back into your blood. Okay, and also the activated vitamin D. Okay, will actually tell the intestinal tract to absorb more of the calcium ions. Okay, so that's how it's going to. That's how the parathormone would actually control the nephron in order to increase the amount of calcium level in the blood. And then also in the bone, the parathormone would actually tell the bone to release the calcium stores, because you got a lot of that on the bone. Now, the second control of hormone is going to be through neural method. Okay, an example is going to be at the adrenal medulla. So when the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, and it will actually stimulate the adrenal medulla. Okay, now remember there's two parts of the adrenal gland. One is cortex, one's the medulla, but this one specifically stimulating the medulla, and that will actually secrete what we call the adrenaline hormones from the adrenal medulla. So what would the adrenal medulla do to the body? It will actually produce what we call the fight, fright, or flight response. And that's actually similar to the sympathetic nervous system action. We studied that on the ANS. Now, the third one is going to be the hormonal control. So what does it mean? So the level of the hormone is the one that's being controlled, okay? The one that's actually telling them that actually you need to have a decreased amount of secretion or increased amount of secretion. It depends on the level of the hormone. So one example is going to be the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will actually produce the releasing hormones. Releasing hormones of the hypothalamus will tell the adenohypophysis, or what we call the anterior pituitary gland, to secrete their hormones. So the adenohypophysis will then stimulate the hormones, will produce what we call stimulating hormones, and then it will actually, in turn, stimulate the thyroid gland, adrenal cortex, or the gonads. And after the stimulating hormones would actually stimulate these organs, the thyroid gland will actually produce what we call thyroxine hormone, and to the body, it will increase the metabolic activity. For the adrenal cortex, it's going to actually secrete what we call cortisol, and the effect on the body is for anti-stress. And the gonads is going to actually secrete what we call androgens, and then the androgens will then produce what we call sperm formation. Okay, so now we have the thyroxine, cortisol, and androgenic hormones that are secreted in the body. So an excess amount of this hormone, the thyroxine, cortisol, androgen, will then tell. Sorry, I'm pointing out the last. I want this whole slide. So the excessive amount of the endocrine hormone will likely to produce what we call a negative feedback for the hypothalamus, a negative feedback for the anterior pituitary gland, and then that will actually decrease the secretion, the releasing hormones, the decrease in the stimulating hormone release, and the decrease in the thyroxine, cortisol, and androgenic hormone release. So whatever control that the hormone is actually doing, it actually tells these glands to stop if there's too much of that hormone. That is what we call the hormonal control. This is an example of the feedback loop, okay? So what happened is the hormone levels rise, okay? And then the receptors in the hormone control mechanism sense to change. So it tells the control center, the endocrine gland, to be inhibited. And that will actually produce what we call a decrease in hormone secretion. The response is going to be a normal level of the hormone. So if you actually have too much, it will tell the control center to actually stop secreting that hormone. If it's too little, the hormones level drops, receptors are sensitized, control center are stimulated, then effector hormones increase their secretion and the response of the hormone levels return toward normal. Okay, so you can either have too high or too low. and that's going to be the feedback loop. So let's take a look at the major endocrine organ, and that's going to be your pituitary gland. So your pituitary gland, or what we call the hypophysis, they actually secrete about 9 major hormones, okay? And their location is located at the hypophyseal fossa. The hypophyseal fossa is the area here where the cella turcica is going to be located, okay? We actually studied cella turcica, which is located at the sphenoid bone. So now we're going to see that the pituitary gland, okay, can either be divided into 2 parts. Okay, so the division, infundibulum actually tells you this is the connection of the pituitary gland into the hypothalamus. And it's divided into anterior and posterior. Okay, this is the anterior, and this is going to be the posterior. Okay, remember 7 hormones are located at the anterior, 2 hormones located at the posterior. Now, the anterior pituitary gland's major major part here is called the pars distalis. Okay, there's other parts here. There's pars tuberalis, pars intermedia, but their function is not as clear as the pars distalis. So, in the pars distalis, okay, they're the one that actually major secretion is coming from. Okay, at the anterior pituitary gland. Now, there's another one called the posterior pituitary gland, or what we call the pars nervosa, okay, and that's going to be at the area here at the back. Posterior pituitary gland, all is located here, and the anterior pituitary gland, all is located to the front, okay? So, let's take a look at the anterior pituitary gland. Another name for that is going to be called the adenohypophysis. So, adenohypophysis, you have the pars distalis, the pars intermedia, and the pars tuberalis, okay? But the largest division is going to be the pars distalis. So it actually contains 5 different endocrine cells that make and secrete 7 different hormones. 5 different cells that actually create 7 hormones. So the 5 cells located at the pars distalis of the anterior pituitary gland is actually what we call the somatotrophic, mammotrophic, thyrotrophic, corticotrophic, and gonadotrophic cells. These are the 5 cells, but each one actually secretes their own hormone, okay? And somatotrophic secretes what we call the growth hormone. The growth hormone influences the growth of the entire body. They're the one that actually stimulate the epiphyseal plate located at the epiphysis, and it will actually stimulate growth of the bone. Now, there's another one called prolactin that's actually secreted by your mammotrophic cells, okay? Mammotrophic cells, they're the one that's actually secreting the prolactin hormone. Mammo means breast, so prolactin means breast milk. So that's what the mammotrophic cells secrete, prolactin. Now, the other one's called is called thyrotrophic cell, and the thyroid stimulating hormones are actually being secreted. Corticotrophic, you can have your 2 hormones here, and that's going to be your adrenocorticotropic hormone that will stimulate the adrenal cortex to release the glucocorticoids. And the other one is called the melanocyte stimulating hormone. It stimulates melanocytes to produce melanin pigments. That is your corticotrophic cell. 2 of them hormones that are produced by this cell. Then the next one is going to be the gonadotrophic cells. They secrete what we call the follicle stimulating hormone. So they actually produce what they mature the sex cells, excreting the sex hormones. Okay, and the other one is going to be the luteinizing hormone. Again, the function is the same as the FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. So we definitely have 7 hormones located at the anterior pituitary gland, secreted by 5 different cells. But there's actually a thing about the 7 hormones. Some of them are just stimulating hormones. Some of them are direct acting hormones. Stimulating hormone, in which the hormone actually still stimulates another target organ or target gland in order to secrete the hormone. So I divided them into what we call red and green. So if you take a look at the division between the 2 types, okay, your trophic hormones, okay, the red ones, the main thing is they regulate the secretion of hormones by other endocrine glands. So they're actually just stimulating hormones. And the 4 hormones you have there is called flat. Okay, so flat is your trophic hormones. So they don't act directly on the body, but they will actually secrete and stimulate another gland in order to create another hormone. The other one is going to be your M, P, and G. Okay. So M is going to be melanocyte-stimulating hormone. It directly stimulates melanocytes to produce melanin pigment. Then we have the prolactin hormone. It stimulates directly the breast to produce breast milk. And then the G is going to be the growth hormone, which stimulates the body for growth, especially at the epiphyseal plate of the bowel. So they're directly acting tissues. Act directly on non-endocrine target tissues. They actually act directly on the organ. Okay, so that's the reason why you can differentiate the two as miles per gallon flat. That's how I memorize it. Okay, MPG flat. All right, so the hormones that I mentioned are the functions are on this chart, okay? Just remember I mentioned main portion of that in terms of its function. But remember, most of this information is going to be at your physiology class. I just want you to know what are the functions of the hormone. Now, adenal hypothesis, okay? The parts intermedia and tuberose, we have not yet understood what their function is, but they actually secrete similar cells that are located there, such as your corticotrophic, gonadotrophic, thyroid, and they're the one that actually could also secrete those hormones that we talk about. Yeah. Now, this is how the hypothalamus controls the adenal hypophysis. Adenal hypophysis is your anterior pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is located on top of the pituitary gland. So what does hypothalamus secretes? It actually secretes what we call stimulating hormone or inhibiting hormones. Okay, so here on the hypothalamus, we have the growth hormone releasing hormone. It's a stimulating hormone to actually tell the anterior pituitary gland to secrete the growth hormone. Somatostatin is an inhibiting hormone. It actually tells the anterior pituitary gland, don't secrete your growth hormone. And then two of the kind here is going to be stimulating and inhibiting. So prolactin releasing factor, PRF, tells the anterior pituitary gland to release the prolactin hormone. But the PIH, or prolactin release inhibiting hormone, it tells your anterior pituitary gland to stop secreting the prolactin hormone. But the rest, they're all stimulating, okay? Thyrotrophic releasing hormone will stimulate the TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Corticotrophic releasing hormone will do the positive effect on the anterior pituitary gland by secreting your ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone. And the last is going to be the gonadotropic releasing hormone. And that will actually produce the secretion of the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. And that will affect the function here of the organ. Okay, so these are going to be the organs that are going to be affected. And remember, thyroid stimulating hormone will actually stimulate the thyroid gland, but the thyroid gland still has to secrete its whole own hormone called the thyroxine hormone. Okay, remember, these are what we call your trophic hormones. Okay, the one in red, and remember it's F. Okay, so my follicle stimulating hormone is going to be F, L, A, and then T. Remember, flat. So what they do is actually stimulate another hormone, another gland, in order to stimulate their own hormones. Adrenocorticotropic hormone will tell the adrenal cortex, hey, release your glucocorticoids. Okay, and then your ovary luteinizing hormone will tell the ovary release their estrogen, and on the testes, it's going to release their testosterone. But on the other ones, it's going to be your miles per gallon, MPG. It didn't say the melanocyte stimulating hormone here, MSH. Okay, MSH actually is the one that makes your skin darker on pregnancy. And that's the one that actually produces that dark line on the abdomen if somebody is pregnant. So they directly act, those melanocytes located at the area, and they're usually active in pregnancy. That's your melanocyte stimulating hormone, M. P, that's going to be the prolactin hormone. It tells the breast to create milk. And then G is going to be a growth hormone. and tells the bone epiphysis of the bone to grow or the muscle to mature and grow and adipose tissue production. So those are the different kinds of hormones that we have at your anterior pituitary gland. But just remember, there's a connection to it with the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is considered as the master of the master gland. The master gland is going to be your prolactin hormone. I mean your pituitary gland. Okay. All right. So we have all the different inhibiting and releasing factors talked about, and then once there's excessive amount of that hormone, it will actually produce a negative feedback either to the pituitary gland or uh, to the hypothalamus, and that will actually stop the secretion of the hormones. So the level of the hormone becomes normal. Now, the hypophyseal portal system is located here, and that's the one that is actually used by the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so releasing hormones are made in the hypothalamus. Okay, and the hypothalamus is then actually release the hormone into these blood vessels. So the blood vessels carries a hormone and actually tells those cells to produce the hormones at the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so that's going to be how the anterior pituitary gland functions. It's actually between the capillary. The hypothalamus and the capillary will actually stimulate the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, and then you have your posterior pituitary gland. Okay, so what does the posterior pituitary gland do? Okay, so let's talk about the parts of the posterior pituitary gland: the median eminence, infundibular stalk, and the pars nervosa. Okay, that's going to be the median eminence, infundibular stalk, and the pars nervosa. Okay, so how does the hypothalamus control your posterior pituitary gland? So instead of a capillary between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland, it's actually between the neurons located at the hypothalamus. These are your neurons. They're the one that create the hormones, and they actually secrete it down here at the posterior pituitary gland. And they actually bring that hormone to another capillary and then gives it to the circulation. Okay, so the neural secretory cells that secrete posterior pituitary hormones are located at the hypothalamus. So instead of being as a hormone, they actually release that hormone located at the synapse. Then they release it at the blood vessel. Okay, now hormones are produced at the neuron cells at the area of the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. And then hormones are transported through the axons of those neurons. Again, then hormones are actually stored in the axon terminals, and they're called Herring bodies. Okay, upon stimulation, the stored hormones are released into the capillary bed here, and further on into the circulation. And the two hormones are called ADH and oxytocin. Okay, so what is the function of ADH? Antidiuretic hormone. Okay, it's sometimes called vasopressin. Okay, and then they actually stimulate the kidney to reclaim water from the urine. So it actually conserve water by bringing it back to the blood. And it also raises the blood pressure by constricting the arterioles. Okay, but that's only when actually the blood flow is slow. So it's a reaction. For the oxytocin, that's to initiate labor on delivery. So it would actually produce what we call uterine contraction. There's also the oxytocin is the one that actually literally would actually contract your breast muscles in order to secrete the milk. Okay, prolactin is the only thing they do is make milk. And then your oxytocin is the one that will actually squeeze the milk out. Okay, so that's actually what the oxytocin do. So these are my 9 hormones located at the pituitary gland. Okay, so these are the 7 here. And there's 2 here, posterior lobe. Okay, so posterior pituitary gland, okay, will affect all the parts in the body. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the other major endocrine gland, and that's going to be the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland is located at the area of the trachea between ring 1 and trachea ring 2. Looks like a bow tie in front. It's connected in the middle by what we call the isthmus. This is called the isthmus. Okay, and if I look at the slide on the microscope, it actually has what we call this area where they collect the hormone in like a swimming pool. Okay, and that's called the colloid. And the cells that surround it is going to be your follicular cells. They're the one that actually produce what we call the thyroxine hormone. Okay, but remember, the thyroid gland is going to also have another hormone that secretes. It secretes thyroxine hormone, but it also secretes what we call calcitonin, and that's through the extrafollicular cells. Okay, so we're going to talk about the thyroxine hormone. Specifically, the thyroxine hormone is T4. Okay, but there's another one called triiodothyronine, T3. It's 5 times more potent than the thyroxine hormone, but they're actually the same function: increased metabolic activity of the body. Now, calcitonin is also produced by the thyroid gland, except that it has a different function. It is antagonistic to the hormone located in the parathyroid gland. It lowers down blood calcium and phosphate ion concentration. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is actually how you have hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease, too much thyroid hormone, and hypothyroidism can actually produce what we call cretinism or mental retardation on infants. All right, so now we talk about the parathyroid gland. The parathyroid gland is located at the back of the thyroid gland. There's 4 of them, small lobes, a little bit small, okay? And that's going to be your thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, located at the back of the thyroid gland. So what is the function of your parathormone? The parathormone, what it will do is actually it'll increase the amount of calcium in the blood. So if I do a seesaw, okay, and this is going to be the serum concentration of calcium in the blood. So what hormone will decrease serum calcium level in the blood? It's going to be your calcitonin. So see how I wrote down cal with an arrow down the bottom? So that's the one that will decrease calcium level in the blood. So what is a hormone that increases calcium level in the blood? That's your PTH, parathormone. Okay. So how does this affect? Okay. So if there's going to be PTH release, because what happened is calcium level becomes low, it's going to actually tell the bone, hey, bone, release your calcium deposits. It's going to dump it on the bloodstream. Now the calcium level goes normal. Okay. There's another one in which the hormone, okay, would actually, the parathormone would actually conserve calcium and activate vitamin D at the kidneys. So calcium is actually stayed and be brought back into the to the capillary. So now it goes to the circulation. So now we have adequate amount of calcium. But also the kidney, it will activate vitamin D. And vitamin D is actually the one that will actually tell your intestines to absorb calcium. Okay. So in both ways, the calcium level will actually go up again. Okay, so that's actually how the scenario between the relationship of parathormone and calcitonin. Okay, so parathyroid hormone. Again, there's another way. The food that has cholesterol, okay, intestinal enzymes, vitamin D is produced, ultraviolet light, in skin, vitamin D is produced. I'm saying by food, okay, such liver produces what we call hydroxycalciferol. And also the kidney will actually produce what we call the dihydroxycalciferol. which is the active form of vitamin D. And then the secretion of this will actually allow the calcium level decrease in absorption and controls absorption of calcium in the intestine. So it's going to actually increase the intestinal absorption of calcium in the body, in your diet. Okay, so this is your adrenal gland. Okay, adrenal gland is divided into the outer portion called the cortex, and the inner portion is called the medulla. Remember, we talked about the medulla already, and that's going to be part of your autonomic nervous system, the fight, flight, or fright response. But the cortex of the adrenal gland, there's actually three layers here called the zona glomerulosa, G, zona fasciculata, yeah, and then zona reticularis. That's going to be your R. Okay. So the three layers of the cortex is GFR. Okay. So let's actually take a look at the medulla. We talked about the medulla, and it actually is similar to the sympathetic response. Okay. So rate increasing in the heart, blood vessels, dilate in the muscle, systemic blood pressure would actually, with the epinephrine would actually increase because of increased cardiac output. Airways dilated, bronchodilation, reticular formation of brain is activated, or what we call the RAS. Liver promotes breakdown of glycogen and glucose, so you're dumping a lot of glucose. That's what epinephrine wants you to do. And then the metabolic rate increases. So the norepinephrine has the same function, okay? And the main thing that specifically stimulate is going to be the vessels, okay? So if you notice that it is due to a great increase of vasoconstriction for the norepinephrine compared to the epinephrine. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the adrenal cortex. We've got three hormones: aldosterone, cortisol, and adrenal androgens. So aldosterone helps regulate the concentration of extracellular cellulite. Okay, it actually tells the kidney, "Hey, I want you to bring back the sodium, and I want you to exchange potassium ions, urinate the ions, potassium, bring back the sodium." So it has a pump that's actually going the opposite way. Okay. Now the reason for this is aldosterone actually produces what we call the electrolyte concentrated body fluid. Okay. And later on we'll talk about the RAS, renin-angiotensin mechanism. And then the next one is going to be the cortisol. So what does the cortisol do? Cortisol is really an anti-stress hormone. So whenever you're stressed out, okay, your body's secreting cortisol. So what does the cortisol do? It actually produces what we call protein synthesis, increase fatty acid release, stimulates glucose synthesis from non-carbohydrate diet. Okay, so just remember that it actually produces what we call an anti-stress effect, and that's what cortisol does. Okay, now the androgen hormones, okay, is a supplemental sex hormones from the gonads. But remember, this hormones can actually be converted into estrogen. Okay, so some of this can be converted to estrogen. All right, so we got aldosterone secretion. So decreasing blood pressure was noted at the area of the kidneys. Okay, and then it will actually stimulate the release of the enzyme renin in the blood because of the decrease in blood pressure in the kidney. Now, renin will actually convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, then with the help of an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme, or what we call ACE, will change angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Okay, so angiotensin 2 then will tell the adrenal cortex cells to secrete aldosterone. Okay, so that will secrete aldosterone. And after secretion of aldosterone, it will act on the kidney to conserve sodium ions in water. So it's trying to increase the amount of sodium and increase the amount of water in the body, in in the body of a person. And then after that, the blood pressure now goes back up. No further initiation of secretion of renin is needed because the blood pressure now becomes normal. Okay, so those are actually your reaction to the secreted hormones uh, based on the decrease in the blood pressure that was sensed by your kidney receptors. Okay, so now we know about the cortisol level. The pituitary gland secretes your CRH hormone. That's only a releasing hormone, but it actually gets its information out here from the higher brain. Okay, the higher brain says, "Hey, this person is actually stressed out, so I'm going to tell the hypothalamus secrete your cortical releasing hormone." Okay, and then the cortical releasing hormone would then actually affect the anterior pituitary gland, and they will actually secrete what we call the andro uh, ACTH hormone, your adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone will be released into the blood, and then after that, it's going to come out and stimulate the adrenal cortex. Adrenal cortex will actually produce cortisol production, and then cortisol affects by the target cell, but most is stimulates glucose formation or promotes fatty acid release, but it inhibits protein synthesis. Okay? And after cortisol is going to be a hormone that will actually produce a negative feedback to the pituitary gland and to the hypothalamus. Okay? And then we're back to normal levels again. All right, next is going to be the pancreas. Pancreas mainly helps the digestive system and actually producing what we call digestive enzyme. But somewhere along the pancreas, we call it the islets of Langerhans cells. They're actually hormonal secretion. Islet Langerhans cells, the beta is the one that secretes your insulin, and the one called alpha, islet Langerhans, that's the one that secretes glucagon. Okay, so those are the two hormones that it secretes, and this is actually what it looks like on the islets of Langerhans. It's lightly colored because remember there's glands, so the glands that are actually secreting here into the lumen, and that will actually produce what we call the effect of the. I'm sorry, I'm kind of sleepy. Effect of the secretion of the insulin. Okay. All right. So now we're gonna go and take a look at the function. There's two hormones that it secretes: glucagon and insulin. Okay. Somatostatin only helps regulate carbohydrates. It's not yet determined what it does on the pancreatic islet cells. But the glucagon, what it does, it will actually increase blood glucose concentration. Okay, and that would actually increase the blood glucose concentration. So it's going to tell the liver, the muscle to break down their glycogen and then convert it to glucose. But the insulin, that's the one that will promote your glucose that is flowing in your blood, okay, and then will actually be inside the cell for its conversion into what do you call this energy, and that's what insulin does. So your glucose level is going to go down. And also the formation of glycogen from glucose, changing glucose into glycogen, which is a storage form of glucose. Then you're definitely going to lower down the glucose. So if I have a seesaw again, okay, and the one that I'm actually looking at concentration is going to be the glucose concentration, the serum, okay. So in order to decrease glucose concentration, insulin is actually the hormone. And in order to increase your glucose concentration, the hormone that will do that is called glucagon. Okay, the glucagon. All right, so these are the two hormones located at your adrenal corticotropic adrenal cortex. I'm sorry, this is actually from the pancreas. Okay, the insulin and glucagon. Okay, And then we have insulin and glucagon. And again, the one that it controls is actually the blood glucose concentration level. A decrease on sugar level of the glucose will stimulate the production of glucagon to increase glucose concentration. But an increased amount of glucose is going to be the secretion of insulin in order to lower down the glucose level in the blood. Now, we actually did all the major organs of your endocrine. So the other organ here is going to be the pineal gland. Okay, so main purpose of that is going to be secretion of melatonin located at your epithalamus. It regulates your sleep and wake cycle called circadian rhythm. And then thymus gland secretes thymosin hormone. It actually promotes the development of certain lymphocyte. It's also important in the role of immunity. That's going to be your thymus gland. And then reproductive organs have the ovaries, so they produce estrogen and progesterone. The testes produce testosterone. Placenta also produce estrogen and progesterone, and your gonadotrophy. Okay, so generally lifespan changes, endocrine glands decrease in size, decrease in secretion. Okay, and it actually produces in a problem, and then disorders comes in. Okay. All right, so that actually finishes up your endocrine lecture. Right, so what I'm going to do now is actually do the models for the endocrine gland, and then we're going to go on a break and then go into the second part, which is going to be the sense organs, eye and the ear. Okay. All right, so I'm going to share you the slide. It says there your okay, let me actually see if it's here. Okay, so let me actually just open up something before we proceed on. Okay, so we're going to go through the endocrine system models. So it's actually just a small PowerPoint. And I'm going to start actually sharing to you that slide. Okay, so we have the endocrine model. Okay, so let me see if it works here. Okay, so I have the models in front of me. So let me actually be sure that's the one that you have on your screen. Okay, so you have the endocrine system models. We're gonna do briefly some of the models for the endocrine gland, and should be able to write on this one. Right, so you have the screen large with the word right, so it means we're in the same track. So these are the endocrine models that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so the first one is going to be adrenal gland. So adrenal gland is located on top of the kidney. Okay, and the thyroid gland is located at the front of the trachea, and that's between tracheal ring 1 and 2. Those are the two different glands. Okay, so you can actually see, I'm looking at the back of the trachea, and this part here is actually the left lobe of the thyroid gland. Okay, this is going to be the right lobe of the thyroid gland. So I'm looking just one half of this organ. Okay. All right, now look at the ovary. The ovary is located here. Okay. And then you have the testes located at the scrotum. Then there's another one called the pancreas. So this is going to be a pancreas. And the digestive enzyme goes into that papillae. Okay, but remember, we're not actually looking for digestive enzyme. An endocrine gland is located within the tissue of the pancreas, and whatever hormone they secrete into the blood. Okay, so that's for the pancreas. This is a picture of the pancreas. Okay, there's going to be some islet cells of Langerhans within the tissue. We call it islet cells of Langerhans. Okay, they're within the tissue there. Okay, another picture of the pancreas. And this is going to be the adrenal gland on top of the kidney. It looks like a dunce on the hat that they make you wear when you're mischievous in class a long time ago. They put you to the side of the corner. It looks like a cone. That's the same thing as what you actually put on top of the kidney. Okay, so I don't need to actually ask you about histology, but I just want to show you that within the tubules of the testes, you see cells, they actually got the first baby cells, a sperm, and then they actually mature to have tails later on. That cells that have tails will then go inside the lumen and then be carried on to the reproductive tract, what a testis is. And here you can actually see cells with flagellum, so they're mature cells already. The cells that are proliferating are the ones on the walls. Okay. And here's going to be the pancreas. And all of these are called, what we call assigner cells. So the cells are creating enzymes for the digestive process. But the main thing that is hormonal is going to be these islet cells of Langerhans. So islet cells of Langerhans, specifically the beta, will produce what we call insulin. And alpha is going to be your glucagon. Okay, and again, this is the thyroid gland. If you notice, this is actually what you call follicles. And that's where the hormone is actually stored in those follicles. And they're actually lined up by follicular cells. Follicular cells lines up that follicle. Okay, and this is going to be the lumen of the follicle. And mostly your thyroid hormone is actually stored here. But your calcitonin is actually secreted on the air of the parafollicular cells. The follicular cells is the one that lights up the follicle. The parafollicular cells, the one that's located around away from the follicle cells. And this parafollicular, they're the one that actually secretes your calcitonin hormone. Right? And that actually finishes up our models. Okay. So I'm gonna actually have to end this and continue on in about a break. Okay. So I'm gonna give you a 30-minute break. So we'll see each other at 6:10. Then we'll continue on with the last part, eye and ear. Okay. And that should be finished for our day, and exams tomorrow. So I'm going to end it, and I'll see you later on at 6:10.